Do you think Afrikaner farmers are the most persecuted group in the world?
I think those 49 people that came certainly felt they were persecuted, and they passed every sort of check mark that had to be checked off in terms of meeting the requirements for that. They live in a country where farms are taken and land is taken on a racial basis.
Okay. Why prioritize Afrikaner farmers?
Well, because it's a small subset, it's a new issue, and the president identified it as a problem and wanted to use it as an example. But that's different from having these refugee programs that were basically spending money to put people up in communities and accommodate them, and it was acting as a magnet.
And the opposition party to the ANC, the Afrikaner Party, the Democracy Alliance, is part of the governing coalition. They joined the governing coalition a year ago, and the leader of that party was given the remit of Agriculture Minister, John Steenhuisen. He is the leader of the former Afrikaner Party, still widely representing Afrikaners. He is the Minister of Agriculture in South Africa right now. I assert that this claim that there's persecution of Afrikaner farmers is completely specious.
I think that the United States has a right to allow into this country and prioritize allowance of who they want to allow to come in.
But I'm going to ask you, what so well justified? We've never allowed a special program to allow Africans into the United States in an expedited refugee status until now. Afrikaner farmers living in a nation governed by a government of national unity that includes the main Afrikaner Party. And actually, an even more right-wing Afrikaner Party is also included in the coalition government. Now, are you aware ever during the apartheid era in South Africa did the United States establish a special program to allow South African blacks who were treated as second-class citizens in the apartheid program, a special program so they could claim refugee status in the United States? Has there been a program? A special program for Africans to come in as refugees to the United States. Persecution.
No, you're not entitled.
So can you have a different standard based upon the color of somebody's skin? Would that be acceptable?
Well, I'm not the one arguing that. Apparently you are, because you don't like the fact that they're white, and that's why they're coming.
I'm just asking you to say that would be unacceptable.
Well, no, I would say that the United States...
a very easy thing to say.
The United States has a right to pick and choose who they allow into the United States.
Even based on the color of somebody's skin.
You're the one that's talking about the color of their skin, not me. These
are
people whose farms were being burned down and they were killed because of the color of their skin.
Well,
guys, I think you guys would have to clarify to me if the DA party is an Afrikaner party, because I think this is part of the, so to speak, I think the way the DA party, especially John Steenhuisen, is being framed in the U.S. Senate by this senator that is actually grilling Marco Rubio. The argument basically is that, you know, Marco Rubio was being grilled, arguing that, made to answer the question, how is it that Afrikaners in South Africa can be considered persecuted, or generally persecuted in a way, when the Afrikaner Party, which is the Democratic Alliance, is now part of the government of national unity, and the leader, who is supposed to be Afrikaner, John Steenhuisen, is the Minister of Agriculture. How, within that whole dynamics, could Marco Rubio and the Trump regime argue that Afrikaners in South Africa are being persecuted? So this is the angle from which this senator in the US is, you know, was really trying to grill Marco Rubio in this really intense brawl both of them had in Senate, and really blew my mind. And what blew my mind the most is Marco Rubio's defense for the choice of, you know, these few Afrikaners that actually came into the US, stemming arguments from the fact that it seems the US refugee laws and asylum laws seems to have, this is from their own analysis now, it seems the asylum and refugee laws had been abused for many years, and so they actually were going ahead to redesign or redefine what it means to be an asylum seeker and all of that, and then the Afrikaners from South Africa fit into that definition. But one thing I also found out in an earlier video by, I don't know if I could quickly get his name now really fast, but he was actually saying that this whole thing of granting Afrikaner status to Afrikaners in South Africa had come up earlier during Trump's first regime. Now, that statement really blew my mind, because it actually appears that Donald Trump has always had these Afrikaners close to his heart. I really don't know how or what could have brought that up, if probably Donald Trump has actually been close to South Africa for many years, but suddenly something just went wrong, or I don't know really. But anyway, that video, the guy was arguing. I'm really trying to get the video so it doesn't feel as though I'm just blabbing. It was an interview on France 24, and yeah, I think it's really important that I get that video so it doesn't feel as though I'm blabbing. But on the interview anyway, he was actually arguing that the whole thing with, yes, I found it. So his name is he's the research director at the Brent Hurst Foundation, and his name is Ray Hartley. Ray Hartley is the research director for the Brent Hurst Foundation in Johannesburg, South Africa. And this is what he had to say about Trump's earlier drive to get, to sort of address this whole issue with Afrikaners in South Africa.
Well, for more, we're joined now by Ray Hartley, Research Director at the Brent Hurst Foundation. Ray, thanks so much for being with us on the programme this evening. South Africa, it has really been in the crosshairs since Donald Trump returned to the White House, but he also appears to have floated this idea about offering asylum to white South African farmers as far back as 2019. Why?
I think if we go back to the final month or so of the election campaign, Elon Musk wanted to invest in South Africa. He wanted to bring Starlink to South Africa. There are large unserviced areas in the rural parts of South Africa, but more than that, he wanted to set up a sort of African hub for Starlink in South Africa, using the financial markets and the tech skills and so on. And he was asked to concede almost a third of his company to empowerment partners in terms of South African law. And I think he took great offense at that. And it started a series of tweets, I suppose we still call them tweets, on X, where he started to focus in on South Africa. It's got these laws, they're race-based. And then eventually it went to the issue of farm killings in South Africa, which is a very emotive issue in South Africa, and where there's quite a strong lobby against farm killings. And he picked up on that, and that sort of morphed then into this narrative about a sort of genocidal assault on farmers. And Trump picked up on it when he was president and issued this, signed off this instruction basically to allow South Africans refugee status, white Afrikaner South Africans refugee status because of the farm killings. So I think that's the story of how it sort of unfolded and developed into what it is today.
Yeah, so you heard it for yourself, guys. And so in light of this whole debacle now, Marco Rubio here had a really fierce response to this senator who was actually arguing and trying to wonder how it is that Donald Trump feels that the Afrikaner refugees are more important than the Rohingya refugees or the Afghanistan refugees or other refugees from other places and all of that. Marco Rubio just really, like I said, I put in the caption, all hell just broke loose in the Senate there, with his really fierce defense for President Trump's choice for these Afrikaners to be kind of like this new set of people that would spark a redefinition of what asylum seeking and the refugee in the US represent. Let's quickly listen to this clash. The both of them clash in the parliament, and share your thoughts, guys. I think this is going on ahead of the meeting with President Ramaphosa, which we're all waiting for. But share your thoughts and on what you think about Marco Rubio and his defense for these Afrikaners.
Today, South African President Ramaphosa is in Washington, D.C. He'll be meeting with President Trump tomorrow. You and the President, as well as other administration officials, have repeatedly and rightly criticized South African policies on issues ranging from human rights to activities that directly undermine American national security. Those activities, in turn, include what appears to be an explicit and extensive pivot away from the United States and towards the Chinese Communist Party. There are also serious and credible allegations that the South African government's decision-making is compromised by widespread corruption tied directly to Iran. They are working together to target our Israeli allies on the international stage. President Ramaphosa himself has taken an aggressive position, leading a charge of genocide against Israel in the International Court of Justice. And he has pushed for precedents and policies that will not just undermine Israel, but expose American officials to vulnerabilities as well. I have every confidence that President Trump will demand South African officials change their policies and will hold them accountable if they don't. And it's critically important for the American people to understand the bases for our policies. Please talk a little bit about the extent of South Africa's malign activities and how they are undermining American national security interests.
Well, it's one of the, first of all, we chose not to participate in this year's G20 hosted by South Africa, either at the foreign minister level or the president's level. And it had a lot to do with some of these issues, in addition to some of the issues they brought on their agenda, which we don't think reflect the priorities of this administration. So the president of South Africa is here today because he says he endeavors to reset relations between our countries. And President Trump, if someone says that, is always going to be open to resetting relations, but it will have to touch on some of the issues just pointed to now. Obviously, the position they've adopted towards Israel is way, not just off balance, but completely geared towards one side, and it makes one wonder about these allegations that are out there now of foreign influence, including with Iran. They clearly, on the global stage, and multiple multinational organizations have consistently been a vote against America's interests, time and again. Not one-off. You always understand when some country has to go in one direction opposite to you, because, you know, that happens. That's what diplomacy is ultimately about. Diplomacy is also about when we're aligned, we work together. When we're unaligned, we have to talk. But when one country is consistently unaligned with the United States on issue after issue after issue after issue, now you have to make conclusions about it. So all I could say about the meeting today, I'm not there obviously because I'm here with all of you. In fact, it may be going on right now as we speak, or was scheduled to go on as we speak, is this was an outreach on the part of the South African president. He said he wanted to come to Washington. He wanted to reset relations with the United States. I have no reports as to how that meeting has gone so far. If there's a willingness on their side to reset relations, obviously was something we'll explore, but we do so with eyes wide open to what they've done so far.
And how does their campaign against Israel undermine America?
Well, I think, first of all, because it echoes some of the charges that are being made by some of the biggest enemies of Israel that happen to be ours, whether it's Iran, whether it's these radical groups that chant death to America, death to Israel. So we're very concerned about that. I also think there's real concern in our mind about some of these international institutions that, frankly, South Africa has lined up strongly behind, who would seek to, if they could, jail, imprison, indict American office holders because of some of the positions we've taken on public policy, even though we're not members to the conventions that create these entities. So if you talk about these groups they are in essence utilizing their forum on the national stage as a nation state under this president and this leadership to echo the claims and the positions taken by not just Iran, but in many cases China as well.
Thank you. Senator King.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Thank you, Mr. Secretary. In response to an earlier question, you sort of posed a question back. What is one thing that has happened during the Trump administration that has strengthened Vladimir Putin's hand in Ukraine, mentioning that the sanctions were still in place? I just would like to introduce for the record an article dated February 28 from NBC News titled, "State Department Terminates U.S. Support of Ukraine Energy Grid Restoration."
That'll be entered in the record.
I was in Ukraine the day after the Palm Sunday bombing in Sumy and spoke to USAID staffers who'd all been riffed. They're going to be laid off either in the middle of the summer or early September. I'm aware that that's subject to litigation, but they talked about the fact that the grant cancellation canceled a grant that USAID had in place, hundreds of millions of dollars, that has been used repeatedly to restore the Ukrainian energy grid after attacks by Russians. I could give other examples. That is the one that is most present on my mind since I was just there. Mr. Secretary, I want to ask you about the program. It's the United States Refugee Assistance Program, and this is a program that state is the manager of, but together with other cabinet secretariats, DHS and HHS, state plays the lead management role, and it is how to manage the U.S. refugee assistance programs in tandem with contractors who help the United States on that. By an executive order on the first day of his presidency, President Trump paused all refugee programs and has canceled contracts to the agencies like the U.S. Catholic Church or Lutheran Refugee Services or HIAS or Church World Services who've been resettling refugees. Those programs are paused. There's litigation about it, but as far as I know, the United States is not, or the administration has not withdrawn the executive order. So there's essentially from this administration no refugee programs for anyone except. In early February, the president announced a special refugee program for Afrikaner farmers, justified A, by some concerns about South Africa and foreign policy, but B, a claim that these were persecuted individuals. So right now, the U.S. Refugee Program allows a special program for Afrikaner farmers, the first group of whom arrived at Dulles Airport in Virginia not long ago, while shutting off the refugee program for everyone else. Do you think Afrikaner farmers are the most persecuted group in the world?
I think those 49 people that came certainly felt they were persecuted, and they passed every sort of check mark that had to be checked off in terms of meeting the requirements for that. They live in a country where farms are taken and land is taken on a racial basis.
Okay. Do you think they're more persecuted than Uyghurs or Rohingyas, or more persecuted than political dissidents in Cuba or Venezuela or Nicaragua, or more persecuted than those who would be threatened should they be returned to Afghanistan by violence by the Taliban?
Well, the problem we face there is the volume problem, okay? If you look at all the persecuted people of the world, it's millions of people. They can't all come here. And we had refugee programs.
So why prioritize Afrikaner farmers?
Well, because it's a small subset, it's a new issue, and the president identified it as a problem and wanted to use it as an example. But that's different from having these refugee programs that were basically spending money to put people up in communities and accommodate them, and it was acting as a magnet. Millions of people entered this country illegally, and today the border is sealed.
Let me challenge you, and I'm just going to say for the public, if you want to understand about the, quote, persecution of Afrikaner farmers, go look at the composition of the South African government. Since July of 2024, there's a government of national unity, and the opposition party to the ANC, the Afrikaner Party, the Democracy Alliance, is part of the governing coalition. They joined the governing coalition a year ago, and the leader of that party was given the remit of Agriculture Minister, John Steenhuisen. He is the leader of the former Afrikaner Party, still widely representing Afrikaners. He is the Minister of Agriculture in South Africa right now. I assert that this claim that there's persecution of Afrikaner farmers is completely specious. Are you aware ever during the apartheid era in South Africa did the United States establish a special program to allow South African blacks who were treated as second-class citizens in the apartheid program, a special program so they could claim refugee status in the United States?
No, because I was probably in 9th grade or 8th grade at the time.
Yeah, well, then I don't expect you to know. I'll just tell you, never has there been a program, a special program for Africans to come in as refugees to the United States. We've allowed special programs for people being persecuted for their religion, Soviet-era Jews. We've allowed special programs for people fleeing from communism, Cuba, Vietnam, the Soviet Union. We've never allowed a special program to allow Africans into the United States in an expedited refugee status until now. Afrikaner farmers living in a nation governed by a government of national unity that includes the main Afrikaner party. And actually, an even more right-wing Afrikaner party is also included in the coalition government. Now, would you agree with me, Mr. Secretary, that if we're interpreting the statutory phrase, a well-justified fear of persecution, we should try to do that in an even-handed way?
I think we should try to do that in the interest of the national security of the United States.
So okay, I agree with you too. We should. Should we try to do it in an even-handed way? So for example, should we say, if you're persecuted on the grounds of your religion, we'll let you in if you're a Christian, but not if you're a Muslim?
I think that the United States has a right to allow into this country and prioritize allowance of who they want to allow to come in.
But I think but I'm going to ask you, so a well-justified fear of persecution?
Yeah, they thought that their farms were being burned down and they would be killed. I think that's a pretty good justification for wanting to come. They're afraid for their lives.
And should it be applied in an even-handed way? That's an easy
No, our foreign policy doesn't require even-handedness. It requires prioritizing the interests of the United States.
The phrase says you are entitled to entrance as a refugee if you demonstrate a well-justified fear of persecution.
No, you're not entitled.
So can you have a different standard based upon the color of somebody's skin? Would that be acceptable?
Well, I'm not the one arguing that. Apparently you are, because you don't like the fact that they're white, and that's why they're coming.
I'm just asking you to say that would be unacceptable.
Well, no, I would say that the United States...
a very easy thing to say.
The United States has a right to pick and choose who they allow into the United States.
Even based on the color of somebody's skin.
You're the one that's talking about the color of their skin, not me. These
are
people whose farms were being burned down and they were killed because of the color of their skin.
Well,
Well, you've demonstrated enough because you think anyone should be allowed into this country for any reason because they met a certain criteria.
Who has said that?
We are going to prioritize people that come into our country on the basis of what's in the interest of this country. That's a small number of people that are coming.
But you said this weekend that
but
there
in
would
other
be more.
cases, it's harder to vet. In other cases, it's more difficult. And by the way, the United States admits people every year. 1 million people come to this country every year legally. 1 million
and
people
now
a year come to this
there
country
is one
legally.
group of people that have an easy pass into this country. For the first time, this administration has said Afrikaners get an easy pass and refugee programs for the remainder of the world are shut off. And you can't say to the American public that we should apply this statute in an even-handed way.
No, I think it should be applied in a way. No, well, you shouldn't be shocked. It should be applied in the national interest of the United States. Our immigration policy should be based on the national interest of the United States, period. End of story. If there is a subset of people that are easier to vet, who we have a better understanding of who they are and what they're going to do when they come here, they're going to receive preference, no doubt about it. There are a lot of sad stories around the world, millions and millions of people around the world. It's heartbreaking. We cannot assume millions and millions of people around the world. No country can. So you have to have a process of deciding who do you prioritize, who do you allow in. We do it all the time. We do it in our immigration system now under our current laws. Unfortunately, it's primarily based on family connection and not on what they're going to contribute to the society from a merit standpoint. That should be changed, but that'll require statutory changes. But the bottom line is this notion that somehow we have to accept anyone who wants to come to the United States is absurd. No country in the world has an immigration policy like that.
And no one is arguing that we should. I yield back, Mr. Chair.